to playback in just a day or two's time. Let's see. Beyond that, I think those are the key things that you'll need to know to get through today. We're going to go ahead and turn things over to Anita and let her wow us with what she has to share with you today.
Thank you so much, Jackie. And, you know, right at this moment, I'm in Nebraska, and I am feeling wonderful. Yesterday, midday, I ended up with the worst case of food poisoning I've ever had. Right in the middle of a speech, I had to cancel the afternoon, and I am celebrating today how my body repaired itself in less than 24 hours so I could be with you. So all is very, very good. And I really appreciated the number of people who sent me questions for the webinar. And though I won't cover them all because we had a long list, I will pick it up on February 13th. Yes, it's a pre-Valentine's Day webinar. And we're also going to send you, you got the PDF files, but we're going to send you, as usual, the PowerPoint and doc files so you can take out what you need for your own follow-up with your trainees. So let's start today with the very first question on your PowerPoint. And actually, two people sent me a very similar question, and this is the exact wording of one person. The active participation in many of our classes is just not working. How can we, quote unquote, repair practices in 2014? Well, you know, sometimes we have gotten into so many details on active participation that we have forgotten the essentials, and the essentials is what will make it repaired, which will make it more viable in 2014. So let's just do a quick review of those. So basically, there's three essentials. Beyond the fact we need to get lots of responses. That's sort of assumed here by all of you who are trainers for explicit instruction. Number one is that whenever feasible, the responses should include all students. So we all say it together, we all write it down, we all touch it, we all say it to our partner. Now I might follow it up by calling on one person to read their response, or one person to repeat what they said to their partner, or one person who is, after they've had time to think about an answer. But even then, everybody is included. Everybody has thought about it, written it, said it, done it. And that is the primary thing right after we get lots of responses. And here's what I'm seeing in schools is number two, is that we aren't always as consistent in structuring the responses. For example, we might ask for a choral response with no signal at all, and then we just get random shout-outs. So structuring it, I ask a question, I give you thinking time, everyone, and you say it. Or even a simpler one, I ask a question, I give you thinking time, I say everyone, and on the downbeat you say it. But perhaps the third one that we need to work on is particularly missing. And every time I watch a video, and we're going to put up some new videos at the end of next week, so be watching for those on our own personal website for TOT. And I look at those videos and I say, oh, Anita, you needed more thinking. They needed more thinking time. You went too fast. You needed more thinking time. And, you know, I perhaps have not reinforced this often enough. So there are numerous studies that have been done on thinking time. So let's just look at one compilation of many, many studies. And first of all, you're going to find that it's almost always in studies referred to as wait time. But I do prefer the term thinking time or think time because we do hope they're not just hanging out, that they're thinking. But in a review of research, here were some of the outcomes of many, many studies on think time. One is when the think time, particularly for higher order questions, extended beyond 3 seconds. Some studies will tell you it should be at least 5 seconds. Some studies will say 6 seconds, but more than 3. They ended up with more students participating. And they also found that the length of the students' responses, particularly when they had open-ended questions, that the length of the responses increased. Well, that makes sense. You've had more chance to think about it, so you add to it, you make connections in your working memory, and thus you have longer responses. But the third one surprised me, but I believe it would be true. If you had a chance to think, well, you're also going to have more questions. So not only did the answers get better, but the students started asking more questions themselves. And here's something that the Common Core would certainly like. They started using more evidence because they had time to think about it. So in the story, it said this. In the textbook, it said this. So they added more evidence. And their answers were more logical. Now, those are really major goals for all of us. And so I'm going to be working on this, giving more think time, particularly to open-ended higher order questions, with the goal of having more participation, longer responses, more questions asked of me, better evidence for the inferences, and more logical responses. So if we just stress those, now how might you do that for review? Well, I wrote up some items that you could use. So you could start with a non-example. Ronnie, what are the steps in the division of fractions strategy? Well, I've got a number of problems there. Only Ronnie's responding. No thinking time at all given. The failure to get everybody involved. So you could do this with your staff, have them think of, well, what would be the options? So I just wrote up like one. So I could say instead, everybody, we've been studying the fractions, division of fractions, algorithm or strategy. Would you please write down those steps on your paper as we open our lesson? Thinking time given, monitoring. Now, please compare your list to your partner. Fix it up if you left anything out. Students, let's look. Now you show them on the screen the steps. Let's review each of these steps using this problem. Now we have thinking time. Now we have everybody responding. Everybody is held accountable. And we all got to rehearse the information, and we got feedback. So I'm not going to go through all of the ones I wrote up for you, and you could generate your own. But there's other situations where you have a non-example and then what they might do. And they'll have, they're open-ended, so you might have different options that your staff could come up with. So let's stick to the basics and then give them practice thinking about it. The basics again is that, let's just go back here for a moment, and is that we're going to include all students, right? We're going to be certain that the responses are structured, and we're going to give them enough wait time, or what we refer to as think time. So use that to go back and review. I'm going to use it next week when I have the gift of hopping over to Wichita. Well, now we're hopping ahead, and you're going to go until we get to the next question. 3 people wrote me about close reading, so we're going to take a little time on it. And one person said, you know, everybody's talking about close reading. Now, how could close reading be implemented in the context of explicit instruction? Well, there's nothing that is inconsistent with explicit instruction, effective, efficient instruction, and close reading. Here is something, though, that I see not being talked about. And that is, how might close reading differ with narrative and informational text? You know, if I'm reading a story with children, we might read the story and I might stop and ask them questions to verify their understanding. And then after we read the story, I might have another purpose. My initial purpose would be that they would understand the plot, understand the characters, understand the setting. But when we're done, I might go back and we might reread a portion for even closer examination in a narrative, like why did the author describe the main character using these words? Or why did the author often use analogies to explain things? So many things that we can look at closely. But I don't always want to do a lot of rereading as we're initially reading the plot, because that's the joy. Reading the story is the plot. Certainly we would ask questions to confirm their understanding. Now, to me, this is a little bit different than reading informational text. In informational text, I really want children to read something, constantly stop and respond to it, so that they're going to be thinking about it. Because the goal is not just to get through the material. The goal is to pick out what's essential, to practice it, to rehearse it, to remember what's really essential. Well, so if we looked at close reading, these are just descriptions from many different articles I read. A rigorous reading, completing deep understanding, being able to tell explicitly exactly what the author is expressing, making inferences based on what the author is telling us, drawing conclusions, examining the meaning thoroughly. But you know, sometimes basically that says you're reading it closely. But sometimes there are going to be some definitions that I think are really helpful. And I quite love this one. Close reading refers to the careful and systematic analysis of a text for a particular purpose. Now that purpose, when we go back and read something, a narrative might be to have an idea of why these two characters were so different. Or why did the author only tell us about this aspect of the character, not every aspect of them? That would be the kind of rereading that we might do. In expository, if we have a specific kind of information we want people to garner, then we might go back and more carefully read that segment for that information. Now, when I look at the articles and the studies on close reading, which really is the kind of comprehension we've always done in the past, we have basically two big approaches. One, we have the question approach. Now, this was not given as much emphasis before the Common Core, but the Common Core state standards really has a theoretical base on questions. And so, and they, of course, have been validated in many studies. I always refer to what I think are the seminal studies on the importance of asking really good questions and how it builds comprehension, would be the research done by Margaret McCowan and Isabel Beck. But we also could teach strategies for close reading, and that we could guide the students in using, and they could use independently, and these strategies would be most important in informational text. So we're going to look at these again. It'll be a reminder on some things, but it'll be some new information because I've been putting a lot of thought into it. And yesterday, this was the topic of the seminar that was only half done. But I am still so thankful to be well and vibrant again just one day later. So let's look at question strategies. And first, you know, I think sometimes we just have to pause and think, you know, like, why is something important? And so why might we ask questions of students? Something we've all done in the past. We've had them read a certain amount, stop and ask questions. And of course, we do it because it's a research-validated practice. Yeah, there's many, many studies that show when we ask questions, it does two things. It promotes comprehension on that text that we're reading. But it also, if it's done again and again and done well, it improves students' comprehension on other passages, on future passages. So it's not just the understanding of this story or this explicit text. It is that it generalizes. Students learn how to think when we allow them to think carefully. But also we ask questions so that students can practice locating evidence in the text. I mean, don't you do that constantly? You're reading an article and then you want to talk to a colleague about it, and so you want to go back and find that segment of it. You are reading a form from your accountant, and you want to find evidence, like how much do I have to pay for my taxes? So you want to be able to locate evidence and information in it. Of course, the Common Core State Standards puts a lot of weight on being able to locate evidence to support your answers. And the third one, I think we totally forget. I'm going to ask you questions, particularly in informational text, so that you have to retrieve the information, that you have to rehearse the information. Thus, you are going to be more likely to retain it. Remember those 3 R's: retrieve, respond, retain. Retrieve, respond, retain. Of course, I know you're all saying it with me. Retrieve, respond, retain. So it is rehearsal also that would lead us to be doing this. Well, so let's look at some of the things we know about questions and asking questions. And I'm going to start with another question from a TOT trainer. Should all the questions be open-ended with many answers possible? Well, you know, as soon as we add something like all, and we insist that all questions are higher order questions with multiple possible answers, you know, we have a problem. Anything that we take to the point of always usually is not a good idea, and it certainly isn't a good idea here. If you look at the reviews of research of asking questions, and Northwest Regional Lab a little while ago did a really thorough review on asking questions and found that many children, particularly young children, did grow more by some literal questions, not just higher order. So here is sort of my response to that. Should we have all open-ended higher order questions? No, 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 no. And maybe I should have typed more on that line. Literal foundation questions are appropriate in many cases. For example, if I am teaching children with low language comprehension skills, in other words, if I read something to them and ask them questions, they'll have a great deal of difficulty. Or maybe they have a great deal of difficulty when I give them a direction. Well then, like any other gradual sequencing of information over time, I'd want to get them very strong on literal foundation questions before I moved into higher order, because one is essential for the other. And why might I ask some literal foundation questions? Well, I might because it gives them a chance to rehearse certain facts. You know, there are certain factual information that people need to have. Like we read a paragraph and it says we have 50 states. I do not want this child in 2nd grade to grow up and be out to dinner and their child says, how many states do we have? And the person leans over and said, ooh, let me Google it. No, I just wanted to say 50. And there's so many other facts I just want them to know. I want to know. So I'm going to ask literal questions so that they could rehearse that. And I'm also going to ask literal questions because it's one of the best ways that I can practice with them quickly locating information, evidence that are in the passages. There is another one that we've stressed in the TOT, and that is maybe I'm asking a higher order question, and I have a group of students who have very poor comprehension. So I say to myself, I've got to lift them up. I've got to scaffold this comprehension. And so what I do is I ask some foundation literal questions to lift them up so I can ask that higher order question and have higher order hope. See, so there's some reasons, some logical reasons You know, we just sometimes need to stop and we get on these bandwagons like all open-ended higher order questions. We need to stop and ask ourselves, does that make sense? Is there no room for foundation questions? Absolutely there is, but it cannot be everything. It's true that often we have not asked higher order questions, and we should, absolutely, but there needs to be a balance. Sometimes foundation questions are exactly what the kids need, and sometimes higher order is exactly what the text and they deserve. Well, let us pull this in together in terms of the Common Core State Standards. So I know that we have trainers in like Nebraska and Minnesota and Texas and Alaska and Virginia who are not using the Common Core State Standards, but many of their own standards in the process of revision look very much the same. And I wanted to show you that even in the standards, like key ideas and details, the students are going to have to be able to answer questions on key ideas and details. So there are foundation questions. And many of them also request higher order questions like determine 2 or more central ideas in the text and analyze their development in the course of the text. Well, you have to put a lot of ideas in order to be able to do that. But let's say I ask that question, I give them thinking time, I have them say it to their partner, and all around the room are puzzled children, and I call on a child, and they say, I don't know, or the corollary, I don't remember. Well, that would lead me to say, I better drop back, ask those scaffolding questions to lift them up, and then ask the higher order question. So just if you look forward a few slides, you're going to see that I summarized this on one page because I do think it's useful to like 7th grade teachers in a content area class or in a language arts English class where they're reading informational text, that they could look at this and have an idea of what they need to do. And you might notice that many of them start with determine. Well, determine is often like pretty direct, pretty literal, pretty foundation question, and then they also have to be able to analyze. So this gives us a little window into that. And just to wow you, I also gave you the summary for 3rd and 4th and 5th grade because that's certainly where we're going to be, in addition to the secondary, really working on this. Well, what else do we need to talk about in terms of questions? Here's the guidelines that, again, let's get it down to so we can remember it. What do we need? What are the essential guidelines if I'm going to have you read something, stop and ask questions? Well, maybe I have a purpose in mind. For example, I was working on a passage from a 4th grade Nebraska history book. And they were going to read about the Oregon Trail. And maybe they gave me that chapter because I live in Oregon. But the Oregon Trail, but also the trail from California to the gold rush from Nebraska to the gold rush in California, as well as the Mormon Trail that went to Utah. Now, the big purpose of reading it was to understand why these trails were created and what was the outcome of the trails and the movement west of people. So I keep that in mind as I design questions, and I really want the questions to end up with them understanding that there was this western movement and these different trails allowed people to move west, where they could meet their own goals of having gold, probably not, having land, having religious freedom in Utah, but that they would constantly focus on that. So I wouldn't want to ask a lot of questions like, what was the covered wagon covered with? You know, that just doesn't get to our big idea. So, number 2, and it is Another thing that is stressed in the Common Core is asking questions for which you actually had to read the material. You all remember keeping them in the text, not out of the text, getting them to think about what was in the text. Now, do all of the questions have to be that way? No, I just read a book on primary comprehension in read alouds, and they suggested that at least 70% should be text-dependent questions. You might ask some other questions like, how would you have felt to be a Nebraska pioneer? But the majority should be ones for which you have to go in the text, not out of the text. And we already talked about this, but I've got to have everybody, not just my gifted one, raise their hand and ask questions, answer questions on what we've read. I have to make it so that everybody thinks, everybody touches the answer, or everybody writes out the answer, or everybody speaks the answer by sharing it with their partner. So, purpose in mind, text-dependent questions, all students respond. You can use those first guidelines just to open up your science book, your social studies book, your core reading program, and ask, what was the purpose established? Does this help get to that purpose? Are they text dependent, and do all kids participate? Well, think time again. I'm really stressing this because, oh my goodness, my own videos show that under missed opportunities I had to write think time, think time, think time. I've got to work on this so that for particularly higher order questions, the students have an adequate amount of thinking time, maybe up to 6 seconds. You say, well, that's not very much, but feel it. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005, 1006. That's a lot more time than I've been giving, so I'm really working on that. And then we can scaffold the answer. And so let's just review, particularly if we have a higher order question and a group has difficulty, then what might we do to scaffold it? So here I have a little paragraph. And maybe after we have read this, maybe we read it using choral reading or closed reading, or they read it silently and we reread it chorally. Then I say, according to this paragraph, how is the continent Antarctica different from the continent of North America? Compare and contrast, okay? So they have to take a number of pieces of information together. Now, if I had a very group that really challenged by comprehension, then I might want to ask some literal foundation questions first. And so I might ask them questions that are going to lift them up and make it more feasible that they're able to use the higher order question. For example, after they read that paragraph, where is Antarctica located? Well, it is the southernmost part of the world. And what covers the land? Well, ice covers the land. And what would we find below the ice? Well, in many cases, we'd find mountains and valleys below that ice. If I did that and then asked the question, according to this paragraph, how is the continent Antarctica different from the continent of North America? Now I can use that information. See, when we ask higher order questions, we're assuming that the student is retrieving that information without our guidance. But if the students can't do that, then we scaffold it. We set them up for success. Setting them up for failure is just not the teacher way. So we set them up for success by asking those questions. The other reason I love scaffolding questions is maybe I have a higher group and I ask them right away the higher order question and they have difficulty with it. And so I can back up and ask those scaffolding questions so that they will be able to then have the data, the information that will allow them to do the higher order question. It's really quite beautiful, good teaching, and it's so logical. I always say, like logic does work, and this is logical. Well, if we want the students to also use academic language, complete sentences, correct syntactical order. We might consider using those ever magical sentence starters is another way to scaffold it. I use this with low groups and high groups. So I might put up on the screen this sentence, and I might have them think of an answer and then share it with their partner. They might even write it down if I had that kind of luxury of time. And they might have an answer like this. There are many differences between the continents of Antarctica and North America. One difference is that Antarctica is very far south, where North America is on the northern part of the world. Another difference is in Antarctica, the land is covered in ice. In North America, most of the land is not covered in ice. Finally, another difference is in North America, we're able to easily view mountains, and we're actually able to view valleys, particularly when we are in the base of them. Whereas these, even the mountains and the valleys, are covered with ice in Antarctica. See, that's the kind of answer we want. And the kids are learning so much from this. They are learning how to use complete sentences. They're learning how to organize an answer. They are talking brilliantly and they know it. They're picking up academic language like another difference. And finally, this is all very glorious. And this one step, boy, I find so useful even with middle school and high school groups until they learn to do it automatically on their own. Well, another possibility for us all to remember is coupled with good scaffolding if we need it. For all of the situations, we have to use best active participation practice. I can't just look out and say, Janice, what's this answer? I have got to structure it. So we read a segment, I ask a question, I give them what? Thinking time, and then I provide a sentence starter, have them share the answer with their partner, and then call on a student. Now they've had thinking time. Now they've had a chance to rehearse. Now they might have even gotten feedback from their partner. So you could just take as trainers that little segment I just went through on asking questions and just use that in one of your trainings. Just looking at the questions in their textbooks and looking at what best practice would go along with it and how to scaffold if the kids have difficulty. Well, that's why we're sending you the PowerPoint so you can pluck out what you need. Another part of questions is having students generate questions. Now, as I looked at research on this, one of the areas where this is particularly useful is with informational text. If the headings are well done, you can use this. You can either use it where you read a heading, you generate a question, you might even write that down in some cases, then you read the section, and then you answer your own question. So this could be done, a strategy taught for kids to do independently if they take notes on the text. It could be used as a class one. Read the heading, think of a question that you might have, share it with your partner. I call on students, I write down 3 of their questions, we read the segment, we go back and orally answer those questions. So it could be done with the whole class. It could be done with a partner. One student reads the heading, they generate and write down questions. The other partner reads that segment, then they go back and answer it. So let's look at a example that occurred in a middle school. So we were reading science, and the whole chapter, or the segment was called Classifying Rocks. And the students generated these questions. They folded the paper in half, and the questions were, how do you classify rocks? How are rocks classified? We read the segment, then the students wrote down an answer. You know, this is close reading. Yes, it's literal, but this is exactly the information you have. You cannot classify rocks later if you don't know the 3 attributes on which you're going to classify them. So here's another example of where a literal foundation question is very critical. Later, they're going to do higher order thinking like, okay, where should I classify this? Well, I've got to look at the mineral composition, the color, and the texture. See, it fits together. One does not happen without the other. And so here we had a heading, how rocks form, and then we had 3 subheadings. And so they wrote down how do igneous rocks form, how do sedimentary rocks form, how do metamorphic rocks form. So we went and read the first section on igneous rocks, how do igneous rocks form, and then we wrote down an answer. Simple, but simple doesn't mean it's not powerful. Very powerful. I read the heading, I write down a question or verbally say the question, the teacher writes it down. I read the section, then think of the answer, and then record it. Now you have another handout, and because I was working in Columbus, Nebraska, I wanted to show you a secondary example. So grab your examples, and here they are, and hop over to the first page. See if I can get mine to move there. Okay, just have to figure out how to get it to move on. Yay, okay. So this was actually an article from Glencoe Literature, and it is an article that was informational text about Poe, the writer. And it was given for the students to read systematically before they read the narrative passage. So in fact, this is how we often handle getting informational text more viable within an English class, is to have informational text that gives information before we go to read. And so as I read it, and these were repeated throughout the whole book. So I wanted to come up with a strategy that teachers could use every time they came to one of these informational texts. And what I thought was the most useful is exactly what we've talked about. The first heading was a loner, okay? And taking that and putting it into a question. So you'd have to stop and think, okay, this is talking about Poe, he's a loner. So you might write down the question, why was Poe labeled a loner? And then you've already read the paragraph, but you go back and you add details to it. He was orphaned at 3. He didn't get to go with his siblings. He went to a foster family, but he was in constant conflict with the foster family. He couldn't get his foster father to give him any approval, so he left at 16. Turmoil and grief. See, just taking that and turning it into question makes you think about it. What turmoil and grief did Poe face? Well, he lost his job. He was an alcoholic. He was ill. His wife died very young. All of that is great grief, accounting for much of the darkness of what he wrote. So don't think that these strategies wouldn't apply to secondary. I wanted just to show you another situation where I had students generate questions, but in quite a different way. So this is a high school economics book. And in the economics, they wanted students to learn certain concepts, but also to do higher order thinking in response to that. So if I was teaching the class, I would have the kids take notes in this way. So it had one little segment labeled profit motive. Okay, this is all under about free enterprise, okay? Profit motive. And I'd have them write first, but I'd have to teach them first a literal question on it, like, what is profit motive? Then they're going to read the section and answer it. Individuals and businesses in a free enterprise system make decisions that will promote profits rather than the government guiding them in those decisions. And then I would teach them how to ask higher order questions. Maybe under the work by Tafi Raphael, questions that are the author and you. So, and I would teach them how to do this. Should the profit motive be the only motive for a business? Of course, there's lots of possible answers there. Someone might say, well, yes, why have a business if it's not for profits? Other people might, as this writer said, the business owner should also consider if the product will benefit the customer rather than provide harm. Also, the owner should act to support his or her workers in terms of income and benefits. So now why might we do this? Well, this is really close reading. I have the concept, and then I have the kinds of questions that might emerge. But let's say that the kids take these notes, and I'm going to hold them accountable for it. I'm going to not read everyone, but I'm certainly going to check, and it'll be a part of their grade. But then, when we have a discussion, I'm going to have their questions be the center of the discussion. They have a reason to write good higher order questions now because we're going to use them for our Socratic discussion, our discussion. Kids can be taught to do this, particularly this is a high school class, and this would be much more interesting to the students than just taking notes. Right? So think generating questions across the grades. Well, let's pop back into our PowerPoint. We already looked at those examples. So now go over to the next slide, and let's look at not questioning strategies, but other comprehension strategies. And for me, the most viable ones emerge for informational text, the big emphasis on the Common Core State Standards. We have good knowledge that, as Dickerson and Simmons and Kamanui said, the ability to identify and take advantage of text organization can contribute to students' comprehension. What's text organization? Well, using the headings and subheadings, using the fact that every paragraph has a topic and important details, right on. So we have numerous strategies that we could use that are based on that text organization. And I tell you, we just have to be using them when we have articles in our core program that are informational text, as well as when we have science, social studies, health, consumer science, any of those situations. Let's look at a few. And the first is a general strategy for all informational text reading. Read, stop, respond. We just have to ensure that we get into kids. I'm going to read a paragraph or two related paragraphs. I'm going to stop and I'm going to respond. I'm going to take notes. I'm going to verbally retell the content. I'm going to answer my partner's questions. I am going to map the content. But we have to not read it like a novel. We have to stop and rehearse it. So one of my favorite, because it's well researched from 2nd grade through 6th grade in general ed, has also been researched in middle school and with high school students that are in Tier 2 or Tier 3, is paragraph shrinking, where students create either verbally or in writing main idea statements. And so the strategy is that I read a paragraph, I name the who or what, that's the topic, I tell the most important information about the who or what, and then I put that together, the topic and the most important information, and I say the main idea in 10 words or less. Now, one of the videos that we're going to put up, I'm modeling this with a middle school class, so you're going to be able to look carefully at how it's taught. But let's just have an example. So we read a paragraph such as this. So I'm going to read when I stop, say the next word. The weather in Antarctica is harsh. It is the coldest place on Earth. The temperature does not get above freezing. It is also one of the windiest places in the world. Okay, so we read that paragraph, and then either my partner or the teacher, if I'm just learning it, the teacher is going to ask, but if I am very facile at it, I might do this with a partner, is going to ask me to name the who or what. And so I say, well, the whole paragraph is about the weather in Antarctica. And then my partner or the teacher says, tell the most important thing about the who or what. And so I say, well, the most important thing is about that. Let's see, that it is, the weather is really harsh and cold and windy. Harsh, cold, and windy sort of sums it up. And finally, I have to say that main idea in 10 words or less. Let's see. The weather in Antarctica is harsh, cold, and windy. Good job. And then I could even write that down. This is a very powerful strategy. It could be used in small groups. It could be used in large groups. It could be used with partners once the students have mastered it. But it's really very tied to the structure of a paragraph. They read to find the topic, the most critical information, and put it together for a main idea. Now, I want you again to know that this is not just for elementary. I want you to look over on page 4 because one of your examples, one of the textbooks that I was utilizing was a, let's see if I can get that up, was a textbook for high school on a consumer science class, and the text was The Developing Child. And the paragraphs were such that it would really perfectly align with paragraph shrinking at the high school level. So one student reads the paragraph, the other student says, name the who or what. Well, it's about the baby's brain and what was the most important information. That, boy, just changes so much. It changes rapidly. It changes all the time in that first year. And now, say it in 10 words or less. I gave you an example here. A baby's brain develops rapidly in the first year of life. And then the students write it down. This is so perfect for this text. The kids enjoy it more than the social little people in the class, than just taking notes. But then they end up with this beautiful summary. A baby's brain develops rapidly in the first year of life. When the baby is given quality experiences, brain development accelerates. Neural pathways form and control body functions and thinking. The brain uses sensory input to build neural pathways. Most actions of newborns are instinctive reflexes. A baby gains many skills that result from development of brain. Notice I left out a few thus so we could get it under 10 words. Wow, that's close reading. Because we're going to have to reread it to say, name the who or what, tell the most important thing, say it in 10 words or less. Not just for little people. We could use it in selected classes. And one of the things I'm finding is we have to sort of match the strategy we're going to use to the content that we are teaching. Well, hopping back to our PowerPoint. Uh-oh. We do not want that. The students could also take notes or map the content, but it's based on the same strategy, topic and details. And so here you have an example of notes, and that goes, I use the Antarctica, all of the passages, but this is 2-column notes that are sort of a summary of Cornell notes. The student in one column writes down the topic of the paragraph and then the details, topic and details, topic and details. And then at the end writes a summary. You know, one reason that I am a big proponent of teaching structured note-taking such as this is the students could use this strategy, yes, for reading informational text. They could use it for taking notes on a really well-organized lecture. They could use this when they watched a video and had to take notes. They could use this when they're organizing ideas for their own informational essay. So it generalizes, and that's what we all want. Well, I gave you another example, again, just to prove that this isn't just for elementary. This is an 8th grade interactive science book. And they have as the main heading, Discovering Cells. And then each of these are for a very short paragraph or two so that the students could just copy the subheading and then put the details in the second column. And so what are cells? All living things are made of cells. Cells are basic units of structure and function. Cells and structure. Structure of living things is determined by how cells are put together. Cells and functions. So, and then at the end of the page, we write a summary. So here we have 2 very different examples, elementary and secondary, but Cornell notes would work in both situations. Well, what else might we do? Well, we could choose to have students, okay, you already saw that. We could have them map the content. You know, I just taught this week teachers in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd and 3rd grade how to do this with read-alouds, where their kids can't take the notes, but there's no reason that as a teacher is reading it, they could stop and ask what the topic was and put it in a little box connecting it to the major topic and then listing the details under it. Wouldn't it be wonderful if kids were consistently exposed to this kind of thinking early on? Yeah. And then they could even look like this one later at the relationships. They have a curved line that goes from weather to living things. You know, it's so harsh that there are few living things. And then one from weather over to land to show that relationship because the weather is so harsh that its land is covered with ice. This is the kind of thinking we want. It's not too complex, but boy, we need to support the kids in doing it. Well, another possibility are referred to as foldables, and I recently found a number of examples, and I just wanted to show you how this might be used. So pop back into your examples and going over to the next page. So this was from a teen health book, and they actually suggest making foldables. So, and they could use it much more than they do in the book. That's a good thing about strategies, is they're best repeated so that the students could gain some automaticity in them. So here, they fold the paper in half with a little tab that you see. They're going to write down 4 major segments, and they cut these so that they can open it up. So inside, they're going to write the details for these. That's my own note-taking handwriting. So one column they wrote definition. So the word in the front was cells. Cells are basic building blocks of life. An example, there's nerve cells that carry messages to and from the brain. There's skin cells that cover our body. The cool thing about this is it's perfectly designed for studying. Now I want to study this, so I say cells. Okay, what are they? What's some examples? Now I flip it open and check. Yeah. Then I want to say tissues, and I flip it open and read about tissues, and then the example. Perfectly designed for checking them out. So you might wonder how I put that in the PowerPoint, because you would make your own. I took a picture of it, emailed it to myself, downloaded it. Yes, technology is our partner in training. Well, going back to our PowerPoint. So let's get back to that PowerPoint and go over to the next one. So we could, as independent strategies or strategies with a partner, we could use paragraph shrinking, we could take notes, we could put those notes in the form of a Cornell notes or mapping notes or foldables. We can also use marking the text, where we don't just highlight it, but we thoughtfully mark it. And we could even write notes in the margin. So looking in your materials, we're going to mark it and this is a simple form, but I think sometimes simplicity is going to be more powerful. We read a paragraph, we circle the topic or main idea, and we underline the critical details. And we could write notes in the margin. I might write the topic so I can get back to it. I might write a summary. I might write down a vocabulary term. I might make a picture of that cell so I'm thinking about it in my mind. I might say, oh, I want to look into this. I want to investigate this. I want to Google this. Well, let's look at an example. Now, I did have this wonderful gift of being in Nebraska this week, and this is from the Car Care book. And it is a book for a class that is all about the mechanics of taking care of a car. And it was the most complex text. The author actually is a teacher of this course right here in Columbus, Nebraska. He wrote a very well organized, very well written material. And I just hoped that they didn't get permanent books, but they got this so they could write in it. And he said, yep, that's exactly what I do. So Ron thrilled me not only with his book, but his intelligent, very intelligent use of it. So this part that I was reading, and let me tell you, my background knowledge is weak in the car department. I don't think I've ever lifted up and looked inside. So it's talking about lubricants and cooling. And so I read this first section, which talks about, well, what is the function of lubricants? And then it listed it. But I want to go back and find that. So I circled the topic, underlined the critical details, and then I wrote a little note in the margin, functions of lubricants, so I can get back there. And then it going through the system. First, the oil is collected in the oil pan, then it's picked up, then it is pumped. It goes through a filter, and then it goes back through the engine as a lubricant, and then back into the oil pan to be repeated. Oh my gosh, I know something about a car now. But you can see how if you could allow the kids to write in the text, that marking the text and using marginal notes together is a very high skill. It's one that we're much more likely to use in a technical manual like this. Now, I'm looking at our time, and I had so much more I wanted to cover today. And so because people submitted these questions, we are just going to look at them. Oh, I can't skip this. No, I'm going to finish up, and I'll have to do the last part next time we meet. So one of the things we always haven't done is thought about the content we were teaching in a domain and how we might need strategies that match that domain. And so, again, hopping into your examples, I want you to look at the next page. Now, if you were to look at some of the research in history, there are some very good strategies. One of them is in the work of a good friend of mine, Doug Carnine, and he looked at historical events as there's a problem. Maybe there's a conflict or a goal, the problem. Then people take some kind of action, and there's some kind of outcome. This is a powerful strategy that I could, with the students, use as a note-taking strategy. So the chapter that we were reading here is Go West. So all of these are related to that big concept of Go West. And the first part is talking about the fact that people wanted to go to the Oregon country. They heard that it was beautiful. They wanted land there. And so they took notes in this way. The event, Oregon Trail. Many people wanted to go there, but there was no map that would allow them to locate trails that they could follow. So what actions were taken out of that problem? Well, the government hired John Fremont. I'm just down the road from Fremont, Nebraska, and They hired him to take a team to explore, to make a map of, to make drawings of what they saw. And this then could be distributed to people who wanted to go west. And so it became a map of the Oregon Trail. And more Americans were able to travel to Oregon, which of course was a larger territory than just the state at that time. Do you see how powerful this is? It tells the story of this event. What's the problem? What's the actions? What are the outcomes? You can read the rest on your own. Because I had a lot of fun doing this. And boy, I am quite convinced as a social studies teacher, boy, I'd be using this kind of very guided note-taking often. It will make it come alive. But there's another area we often neglect, and that is the use of reading strategies with story problems in math, where we could use a strategy here. They read the problem, they think about it and mark it. For example, they circle what they are to determine, they underline the information that is going to be used in that determination. Then they paraphrase it. I have to figure out, using the story problem at the bottom, I have to figure out the total amount of time I'm going to be watching the previews and the movie. And then they either visualize it or make a visual representation. There's one line that's missing there, but so they represent it visually. So I might make a box that says, a rectangle that says 1 hour and 59 minutes, and I'm going to connect it to 15 minutes, and the total time is what I have to figure out. So a diagram, a picture makes a difference. And then I might create a number sentence, such as 1 hour, 59 minutes plus 15 minutes equals. And then I'm going to solve it. And I look at this and I say 1 hour and 59 minutes. Well, there's 60 minutes in an hour. If I just take 1 minute from the 15 and put it there, I have another hour. So now I have 2 hours and 14 minutes. Oh, yay! And so I have 2 hours and 14 minutes. I could check that by actually doing it mathematically or looking at a clock and visualizing it. And then I could explain it to you, how I did it. That is a specialized, for math, a specialized reading strategy. You know, the challenge here is, it's a good challenge. I always plan too much for you. And right away, the next set of questions was on complex text, but we're going to have to do that. You can read the answers, but we're going to do it with explanation on February 13th. It'll be the day I wish you a glorious happy Valentine's Day. But I will tell you right now, I wish you the best of years. I honor your commitment to education in 2013 and 2014, and we can continue to make a difference. Every year, we must, because a child only has that year. So we must make a difference. Of course, you're totally welcome to utilize all of these training materials, and I am just so thankful for you. Hope this was useful to you. You know, I'm going to ask Jackie if I could stay online. I know many of you, your time is up, but if anybody does have a question, I'm just going to stay right here and answer them.
We certainly can stay right online here, Anita. They can go ahead and send their messages in the chat box, and if you send them to all panelists, both Anita and I will be able to see those. For the folks that are going to hop offline, just a really quick note, we will have the next webinars on February 13th and April 17th at 1 p.m. Pacific time. We will send out the recording link and the PDFs and the documents, the PowerPoint, all in the next day or so. If you have questions that Anita can't answer for you today or that you think of later, you can email them to her at archerteach@aol.com. And we also appreciate all that you're doing and hope 2014 is off to a great start. And we'll stick around as long as folks have questions.
Thank you, Jackie. You make it so easy for me. Appreciate that. So, thank you, Rebecca, for being on. Jen said, Thank you once again for sharing your wisdom with us. Did I hear correctly that new videos are expected in the near future? Will those be on www.explicitInstruction.org? So I'm in the process of working with the wonderful videographers in Wichita who have filmed and edited even a number of videos that I did very recently. And so some of them we're going to put up on the website. Some of them I'm going to put just up on R, where you get all of your documents for explicit instruction. And the reason why, some people said, well, I wish some videos were held back so that they wouldn't have already looked at them when I went to do training. So, yes, next week when I'm in Wichita, I'm going to work on the last details on that, and then my own videographer is going to post them. So, yay. And we have other videos that we're going to add. It's something I've just haven't found time to do, and now I'm going to force myself. It's going to be what I do a little bit every day. Okay, Jen, you're very, very welcome. Okay, well, I don't see any other questions popping up. So, blessings to all of you in 2014. May it get warm in Nebraska and all of the Midwest and all of the East Coast. The only sunny thing that happened in Nebraska for me was my rental car is from Florida. So I laughed about that because it has been very cold here. So take good care. And I love spending time with you too, Miss Cassie. Let's see. Okay. You know, Suzanne, she wanted to know what book I've mentioned about read alouds. And I don't know if I'm able to share that name yet. Suzanne, would you email me that information? I'm going to ask the publisher when it comes out and if I can share it, because they send it for me to review and to give a recommendation, which I really will recommend. It's very good, but I need to check on that. So email me that and I'll find out that information for you. Okay, is that it? So, Suzanne, I also will write down here that next time, do a short thing on read alouds. Okay. Preferably read alouds that are informational text. Oh, hi, Dawn. And hi to all of my friends in Wichita. See you next week.
Right, Anita, thanks again, and thanks for, coming on board and feeling better today than yesterday.
Oh, so much better. In fact, I feel terrific. Thanks so much.
All right, have a great afternoon.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Anita, I've just got another question that came from Becky Brandel that I've sent to you in the chat.